Okay, great. Well, let me just introduce Marijke as well, and Garth. So I met Garth through a very close friend of mine called Vian or William Hall, and just stellar guys. I think it was a birthday party at the time, and then I met Garth,
Yeah.
and we struck it off just immediately. Had a good conversation and resonated. And then I paid you a visit when the previous firm Flick. I went
That's
and
right.
paid you guys a visit. You were
Yeah.
mainly producing in video production, if I remember correctly, and also in the educational space. And I believe a lot of different special niche things for companies to help educate staff and customers. So Marijke, just for context, I met her through a brand strategy community that we belong to,
Great.
driven by a lady called Annelie Hansen, who I'm not sure if you have heard of her before, but she's pretty big part of The Future, which I know you're
Yes, I
familiar
have.
with
Yeah,
Chris
she
Doe.
stays in Holland, doesn't she? Yeah.
It's Sweden, I believe,
Sweden.
but
Sweden, sorry.
close enough.
Yeah, she's a lovely
Yeah.
lady. Yeah.
Yeah, she's cool. Just had a call with her this morning as well. It's super helpful just in helping to craft and shape our own brand strategy practices and knowledge. So it's something we are keen to learn more about and get better at. So here's my fun question to kick off this interview. Who's your favorite superhero?
It's got to be the Hulk, hands down. I've always been a Hulk fan
Really?
since I was
Awesome.
since I was a kid. I mean, there are other guys that I think are cool, but a lot of people won't necessarily know who they are. But the Hulk is definitely he's a good character. Eh? He went through a lot of change, and yeah, I think for myself, my career has kind of been shaped and changed over the years as well. So where I started out and where I am now are very different.
Can you say a little bit more about the career change where you mentioned you've gone through many changes? Can you kind of break that timeline up and see how it's brought you to where you are now?
Yeah, definitely. So if you look at my career, I mean, not ironically, but I so I went to study design. That was what I studied when I finished school. So I did design and I did a bit of advertising and marketing as part of that. And the reason I went that route was I was passionate about film back in the day when I was in school. And I was part of I was involved in filming things like sports events and anything I could do to be involved in film back in the day on traditional kind of camcorders, nothing fancy. But there was just nothing to study like that when I first finished school. You literally would go and work for state TV. That was kind of your options. There was very limited stuff. You might get a chance to work in the film industry, but it was quite rare. So I went and studied design because I thought, okay, it's creative at least, and then if I get to study it and become a designer or an art director, I can then get involved in advertising and direct ads and things like that. And so I did design for many years. That was what I first kind of set out as a traditional designer, which I absolutely loved. I really enjoyed it. And then my design took me into art direction, which then took me into working at a really big agency called TBWA, which is a global network of agencies. Hunt Lascaris is the South African version of TBWA, or that's their arm. So they call themselves TBWA Hunt Lascaris. And I worked there for about 5 or 6 years. It was a great place. People were really cool. Got to do some advertising stuff, but also a lot of like promo videos and some design and some ads. There was a lot of mixed and campaigns. It was quite a mix of what we got up to. They didn't limit us to just one thing. They were quite keen on this whole thing of through the line advertising, where you got involved with a bit of everything, a bit of design, a bit of art direction on sets, and then storyboarding and things like that. And then, so I really enjoyed that, but I there was an interesting, so I went from design, I went to that. And then where it then went was I saw that, and it was, we're going back 20 years. 20 years ago, I saw that film was starting to change. I saw that some guys were bringing out cameras that had really good lenses on them, and they were getting better and better all the time. And they had just started putting cameras onto cell phones. So they weren't great. I mean, Nokia was probably one of the biggest providers of cell phones back then. Apple didn't exist. And then I read an interesting quote by Steve Jobs, which said that the internet, the power of the internet in the future is going to be in its ability to send images around the internet. And I thought, okay, that's really interesting, because the internet was still very slow back then. I mean, it was prior to the dot-com crash. And I thought, okay, if the internet gets faster and video is getting better, slowly but surely, it's getting cheaper, I kind of want to be a part of that. So I left my ad agency and I started contracting as a freelance art director. And I started a clothing company on the side as well. I started a T-shirt company, and I thought, I can do T-shirts, and then I can do, I don't know a single creative that didn't start a T-shirt company. But I started a T-shirt company as a bit of a fun project on the side. Saw that wasn't going to happen, just wouldn't make enough money, so carried on doing the art direction stuff. And then at the same time, what we did as my ex-business partner and I, he was still working full time and I was on my own. And we decided to make a short film using graphics plus a friend of ours' film camera. And it was before anyone was really playing with graphics. So we're going back like 20 years ago, before anyone was really playing with graphics and film together. And it came out really cool. I mean, it was a real kind of a hack job, but it was fun making it. And one of the clients that I met the one day said, I see that film is becoming more and more accessible in terms of the quality of video. Have you played in this space at all? And I just said to her, and she was a German art director that I had met a few times. She was working for quite a big agency. And I showed her that little video that we had done. And she gave me a bit of work for a financial services business that they were working on as an agency. She said, this is great. I like the way you guys do this. So it went from design to art direction, now getting into motion graphics and storytelling with graphics and film. And it was a completely new scene. I mean, nothing like that was really happening back in the day in South Africa. I mean, globally, there was some stuff happening in bigger cities, but not a lot happening back then. And I always had a love for understanding complex stuff by drawing graphics and diagrams and things like that. So even back then, the work that we were doing, it was very infographic-y by nature, even although infographics didn't technically exist. So like 20 years ago, we already were doing, I used to call them flow diagrams. We're already doing that stuff. And then we got completely immersed in that world of motion graphics and storytelling. So you're doing design, but you're also doing motion graphics and sometimes some small TV ads and things like that. So that was quite a big shift. And my business partner was at the time was really instrumental in that because he's really technically minded. I've always been big picture, vision, sort of overarching idea, very strong conceptually. But he was always good at that, but also really good at just the technical aspect. So we did a ton of stuff back then, and that's when we were called Flick. So he joined me about 2 years after me being on my own. And then that was an interesting time because what happened then was we were working with a lot of agencies, but you are very beholden to an agency. At the end of the day, as a creative, you're not working directly with a client, you're working with an agency. So we decided to actually start to working directly with clients. And that was another shift. Mm-hmm. So now you're going from essentially working for agencies where you're just contacting them every month, and now suddenly you're having to reach out to clients and learn about how do you deal with a client. So you're not dealing with an agency as a creative, you're dealing with a client as a creative, like a corporate client. And that was a really big shift. That was learning, like, who do you chat to in the client world? Because traditionally you're just talking to an agency's producer. You're going to the producer, you're showing your show reel, and they kind of pigeonhole you for a certain kind of work. But now when you talk to a client, mm-hmm. they're looking at something with a commercial lens on it, completely different. So now you've got to learn that. So yeah, those are some of the big shifts that I went through over the years for myself personally. Then growing a team as well. I mean, we grew the business to 28 people. That's quite a responsibility to have that many people under. But that's probably, I'd say those are the biggest. It's full time, and you make a lot of mistakes. I'll be honest with you, because you go from being responsible for yourself to learning how to deal with clients, and then you have to learn how to deal with teams of people and people's temperaments and moods and your own temperaments and moods. So it's huge.
What's the biggest lesson from that, or maybe one of the biggest lessons that you learned in that process, in that shift?
So I made so many mistakes over the last 20 years. You really, and it's what, there's things that you always learn in hindsight. Like, hindsight's always 20/20, but I think if I had to go back in time to that business, I would have probably kept it between 8 and 10 people. I would have not gone bigger than that. And look, things like automation and all of that stuff is fairly new. Like, back then, mm-hmm. MailChimp wasn't even a thing really back then. It was on the kind of infancy, like automation and all of these cool tools that we've got now. It's only really been the last 5 years that they've kind of come out. But I would say I would have probably kept it to 8 to 10 people. And the other big thing I would say is guard your culture, like look after mm-hmm. it like you're carrying an egg on a spoon. Be that kind of precious about it, because our culture got bad at one stage. It was really not good because you're under pressure to meet deadlines. And because you're always chasing, you can end up having miscommunication around stuff because you've got to translate information to someone else who's got to then fulfill a task. And if you don't articulate that properly, you can end up causing mistakes and things like that. But yeah, that was a big lesson. Size, culture, and the other thing I would say, which I've gotten better at now, but I would say be super specific on who you serve and in what industry. So, and again, no one taught me that stuff, but if I had known back then that essentially it's sales enablement for complex businesses, or anyone that struggles to articulate their value proposition simply, that's our clients, or that's the sectors we're in. So that's like finance and medical and technology. Those are probably the more complicated, maybe engineering, but we don't really have engineering clients. But the fact that we are really dumbing down and making stuff easy for sales and marketing people, like, I would just dial into that, and not, because you end up getting involved in like change management and a bit of this and a bit of this, and you can throw yourself all over the show, and I think that the thing to learn about a business is your role as a leader is to actually work yourself out of a position of having everything in here and basically making sure that the staff understand it 100%. So there's a great book called Built to Sell, and basically the author of the book is a very smart guy. It tells the story of a design company who wants to sell, and what he says to the founder of the design company, what are you really best at, and where is the least kind of friction in your team? And he says, well, we're really excellent at logos. So he says, just do logos. Don't do anything else. And the reason he said that is because then you essentially are making your business the logo making machine. And no one teaches you that stuff. Like when you're a creative, you do a bit of this and a bit of this, and yeah, I'll do that. Yeah, I'll do that. And what ends up happening is you're always the one that gets caught in the machinery because you're the one that knows how to solve it. So you always have to end up going back. So it ends up becoming a whole big cycle, if you know what I mean. Whereas you've actually got to look at your business differently and go, okay, how do I simplify? How do I become known for one thing? So yeah, those are some of my lessons, hard-earned lessons, painful lessons.
Garth, can you very quickly just say what your current company is and what you do and kind of what your company does?
Sure. So what we did, my business partner left in 2020. 2019 was a tough year for us, just in terms of the South African economy. We really we struggled a lot and we skinnied the business back. And then he left in 2020. And just prior to him leaving, we had already decided that, so we had, our name was Flick, F-L-I-C-K. And then our little strap line was We Explain Stuff. Which was always quite fun. And at that stage in the market, there was a lot of guys that had started coming up that were doing animations and graphics and things like that. And similar stuff, but not at the level that we were doing it at. And so I just decided we're going to take the Flick away and just change it to We Explain Stuff and kind of morph into that. And it was met with some resistance, but people love the name now. They hear it and they laugh and they think, oh, it's really cool. It says what it is. And that was really the purpose. So what we do now is pretty much what I said earlier. The clients we work with generally have a complex business that's hard to explain, so words are kind of not enough. So we will help them articulate it visually. So we will take time to actually visually unpack exactly what the business does. And then that is the front of our process. And then that will turn it. So it's quite a strategic engagement we'll have with a client where we'll really get to the heart of the business, what it is, what it's about, what the value is it's adding to its clients. And we will articulate that value proposition on one page. So we work really hard to make it super, super clear on a page, which is tough to do, but it forces you to be very choiceful with what you say and how it's visually represented. And the analogy that I often use with clients is, if this was lying on someone's table and you weren't there to explain it, would they get it? So that's kind of where that's where we go. And that's literally like, so it's fully branded. It looks graphic. It's visual. It's got a story in it. It's got some diagram or some kind of visualization, maybe throughout, depending. And then that's becomes the tip of the spear. So that's really their value proposition on a page. And then from there, they can cascade that into other elements. So they can turn that into a video. They can turn it into a sales aid, like an interactive document. And some clients do come to us as well, and they say, can you help us turn this into a website? So we're like, yeah, we can do that. I mean, we don't actively advertise web. But we can definitely offer it as a service. But our main service are those three things. It's your story on a page, your story as a video, and your story as an interactive sales aid. And our whole, we've got quite a simple methodology. I use like a pyramid analogy, where your kind of one page is here. It's the big picture, it's context. And then all the granular stuff is kind of lower down. So your presentation or your sales aid is quite a rich document. I mean, some of those that we do can be 100 pages. They're quite dense documents. But then you're really getting a good, like if a business has 10 products that it's selling, and they want to put a whole bunch of sales collateral for their team in there, you can do that, you know. So, but it's more bottom of the funnel stuff. So we'll do some awareness stuff, which is like the infographics and some of the explainer videos, but a lot of where a salesperson is sitting with a client, kind of like this or face to face, we will provide that asset for them where they can actually drive a meaningful conversation. So I often say bottom of the funnel and then maybe a little bit of top. Occasionally clients will come to us and say, look, we need a case study. Can you do it? And we can do it. It's no problem. But those are the main things we offer. So.
Fantastic. Yeah. Well, thanks, Garth. You wrote a book. Tell us a bit more about the book. How did you come to the decision to write a book? And tell us about the title, how that came about.
Yeah, so it was so long, and you kind of asked it earlier. I've been in business for a long time, and a lot of people that talk about business, especially to business owners, and I would say I'd say probably to entrepreneurs, they talk at a very academic level. And so when you've got a design business, or you've got a consulting business, or you've got a specific skill that you're trying to sell, you don't necessarily understand some of that stuff, because you're almost quite removed from some of the concepts and the principles. So I chatted to my sister-in-law. She's an industrial psychologist in South Africa. It was during COVID, and I phoned her up and I was like, hey, Susan, that's her name. I wasn't just calling her Susan. That's really her name. And I was like, I said to her, do you think that there's merit in creating some kind of tool that can see where the gaps are in a business in terms of its communication? So she said, well, what do you mean? So I said, well, like, is the value proposition clear? Like, does the business have a vision? Does it have a clear process to deliver on that value proposition? So she was amazing. She said, yeah, I think there's something in that. And then what we did is, I'll actually show it to you. You want to see it quickly?
Absolutely.
Okay, so basically what we did is it all came down to these 5 circles. Okay. Now, I'll explain it to you really simply. This here, let me just grab some pink. It's easier to see. So this here, right, is the front of your business. Okay. So call that front. This is how do I get clients? So clients coming into my business, how do I acquire them? And then how do I retain them? So when they go, how do I get them to come back again? Then what you've got is the back of the business. So this is back, and then this is all about process. So what are the kind of cogs and the gears that I need to use to deliver on this? And then this is all about teaching others. So how do I actually teach others to do what I do? Otherwise, it all sits in my head. And then the middle of the business is basically, this is the heart of the business. So this is the middle. So this is your vision, your mission, your strategy, etc. And so I started here, and then what I did with that is I wrote a book on coffee, because coffee is a really easy thing to explain. And I thought, okay, like, what are you selling? If you're selling coffee, a cup of coffee, it's quite easy to explain. But then what is the strategy around your coffee and your purpose? What is the vision of your coffee? Like, why do you want to sell coffee compared to somebody else? So if you compare wimpy coffee or like some kind of not smaller, but some cheaper coffee compared to a Starbucks, it's very different because their purpose is different, And then
Marijke, you might not know Wimpy. It's like a side of the road. It's very commercial.
Yeah,
there are many Wimpies.
cheap,
It's like a franchise chain store, kind of cheap and nasty.
totally
Cheap and cheerful,
like cheap
maybe.
cheap and cheerful. So if you look at that, like, so how do I attract customers? That's like your product, and what does it represent? And then how do I keep them? So that's about ongoing sales. So think about selling things like donuts. Maybe you sell like croissants, pastries. Maybe you tie them into some loyalty program, but that's how you keep them in there. And then the production side is really like your baristas. Who are the guys that are making the coffee in the back end, that are baking, like who's doing that. And then the middle is about your strategy, obviously, like what's your strategy, what's your vision, those things. And then the learning is how are you documenting all of this stuff so you can teach someone else. So then what I did with that is I just basically turned it into the story of a coffee shop. So I literally mapped it out like that. And then from there, I built a whole story around it. So there's a book on Amazon, but it's that whole pyramid principle again, where you're taking a kind of a big picture view of something that's quite complicated. You're distilling it into its essence, and then I wrote it in COVID, and then one of my writers, Inga Marie, she's part of the team. I just said to her, look, I've written this book. Want to use coffee as the analogy, like please, read it, edit it, like it needs to read in like 30 minutes. It needs to be like Tuesdays for Murray kind of thing. It needs to be really quick and easy. And then we put lots of graphics in it. There's a couple of sort of infographics that we dropped in there where you can fill in blocks and things like that. And obviously it's got the tool at the back, which shows those 5 discs, the 5 colors. But it's the story of a business owner. That's really what it is. It's a story of a business owner told through a cup of coffee. So it's a business owner that starts a coffee business and it just gets out of hand. And it gets out of hand because he doesn't think about his vision. He doesn't think about branding. He doesn't think about his processes. A lot of his stuff is kind of up in his head. And he's documented some stuff, but other stuff he hasn't. So when people leave, it's a bit of a dog show. So yeah, it was cool.
For our audience who may not know the book, it's quite a mouthful as well, just like a cup of coffee.
Yeah, it's a bit of a mouthful of a title. My wife actually came up with it. I thought it was quite funny. It's called I Don't Need Another Inspirational Quote. I Need Coffee. And the whole idea around it was really that was the book is meant to be, it's like it kind of helps you wake up and smell the coffee, instead of hearing all this inspirational stuff that doesn't really help you. The idea is that you read the book and you're like, oh damn, like this is quite insightful. So I've been giving it to a fair amount of people. I mean, I know you bought the Amazon one. There's another strategist in Cape Town that she's got her own business, and she read it. She said, I read this in one sitting, and I was like, that's the point. I want it to be easy. It's a business book that you can read really quickly, but get the principles in your mind like super fast. And she said, I love this. It's made me think so much. And that was the point of the book. The point is to really try and help other entrepreneurs. And I think the beauty of, just to show you again, not to harbor on about it, but look at this. This is how profound it actually is. So if you look here, if you don't have customers coming in, you basically don't have a business. If you don't have customers that are coming back, you don't have a business. If your vision's not clear, you can't differentiate yourself from the competition. If your staff are not properly trained on how to deliver, what you end up selling someone and what you end up delivering are not the same. And your team obviously needs to know how you do stuff. It mustn't all just sit in your head. So if you look at these in 3 silos like that, front, middle, and back, you'll find a lot of businesses are really good here. They can deliver. They might even have vision, but they're really not great at getting customers. So it's a really, really good thing. Like once you look at the diagram, you're like, oh, I'm really sucking in this area at the moment. Like, or think about the coffee analogy of when you sell someone coffee, but you know it's not good. So it's the same as work. Like you give them work that you've promised, but it's not up to scratch. And you know it's not up to scratch. It's like it's a bad customer experience. So it's quite memorable. You know, it actually, like, it's a simple little model, but when you look at it, you're like, okay, that's really thought-provoking. And I think it's like the yellow one is culture, the bottom one, which is all about teaching your values and your processes and stuff. And I watch that one like a hawk with my team because we all remote. So I make super sure that I live our values and, you know, I treat the guys well, even when they push my buttons.
And I'm sure they do at times. Yeah, I was curious about how does one build culture with intention, especially with distributed teams who are working remotely or individuals? It must be quite a challenge.
So I think, so the thing with culture, and culture is a funny thing. It's one of those things like riding a bicycle. You can tell someone how to do it, but they've actually got to learn to balance and actually figure out, because there's a very practical side to it, but there's also a real, like, if you think about yourself riding a bicycle, you're not telling yourself to stand up. Your body's kind of figuring it out. Your head's not really doing stuff, you know, and so the thing,
it's a tacit culture, knowledge, I think they call it.
Yeah, so culture's like that. It's got a heart and a head aspect to it, and the simplest way that I would describe culture is your operating system. So it's the way that you function. So if you think about your business, like, we've only got 3 values in our business. So your values are kind of like bits of stone in your concrete. They're the things that kind of bind everything together. So we've only got 3 values. We've got clarity, which is, because our business is called We Explain Stuff, so clarity is one. And that's all. And the behavior that's attached to that is ask questions. Like, there's no bad questions. So just ask questions until you're clear. But also be clear in how you articulate stuff to people, like, be clear. And the other one is teamwork, which is all about we. So I talk about us as a collective versus me. So all my mails, it's always we will get back to you. And it's all about playing as a team, you know. So my big thing there with people around that stuff in particular is, if you're passing something that you've done to someone else, make sure it's passed in a way that they can understand it. Don't just pass it on, because it's the same as like football. You know, if you're playing football or rugby or whatever, don't give someone a bad pass that's going to set them up for failure. You know, pass properly. And then the last one is excellence, which is really about, you know, do stuff to the best of your ability. Don't just do an average job. Like, do a job that you're proud of, even if you're not the one presenting it to a client. And even in the way we treat each other, you know, treat each other excellently. And then I think you got to try and model that as a leader. So if someone asks you a question and you're not feeling like you want to answer it because you may be tired or agitated, you've got to remember, hang on, one of the values in the business is clarity. So you've got to actually go, okay, I need to answer this person, because it's the operating system that everyone lives by. So it's not a contrived thing. But you got to keep reinforcing it. I mean, I've got one or two new guys in my team, and they haven't gone through our process where I talk about those three things. And I can see already some of the stuff that they do. I'm like, oh, I need to chat to them. I need to pull them aside and actually have a word with them, because that stuff spreads. Yeah, and then I think that's it. But keeping it simple is key. I think that's the big thing. I think you can't make your culture complicated. It's really got to be clear and simple. And if someone's not living that stuff, you've just got to say, hey, around here we don't do that. That's not the way we deal with stuff. We deal with it this way. Because otherwise you start having other things creeping in.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It reminds me of a book I've recently read called The Motive by Pat Lencioni. I don't know if you've read it. Mm-mm. It's also quite a short book. And he speaks of this role that you have. Yeah, you're living that. He talks about a CRO in terms of, if you are the CEO, you can be a CRO, and that's a Chief Reminding Officer. And that's your job often as the leader, just to remind people over and over of the same principles, the same values, because either people forget or they're busy and they don't really take it all in. But you need to keep reminding them of those values, because that's just the human nature to forget or to get slack. And so
totally.
you have to do that.
And you've got to keep it simple. Hey, I think a lot of the time when it's your business, you're very passionate about it. So you can often be quite verbose and long-winded about things, but you've got to really be mindful that everyone else is not. So you've got to really try and be quite crisp in the way that you deliver it. But yeah, you're spot on. You've got to keep reminding people.
Marijke,
any questions from your side?
Yeah, I kind of wanted to touch back on the point when you were talking about you've seemed to be at the forefront of all these kind of technological changes in video, and you've seen it all happen. What are you kind of seeing now, and what is coming for the future of our digital world, of video, Sure. kind of the space that you're working in?
It's a great question, and it's funny that you asked that question, because I was thinking the other night about exactly that, and I thought, the cell phone thing, I saw it happening back in the day, and I still remember going to producers when we got, my ex-business partner and I we got a really cool camera from the States with special lenses that you could add on, which gave it a very film-like look, when no one would even dare do film production on a camera like that. They were too into the high-end stuff. But now it's the norm. I mean, guys are shooting stuff nowadays like that. And then obviously there was the visualizations and the graphics and all that. I think the biggest thing that I see now, maybe no one else is, maybe people are already thinking like this, but if you look at where things are going, it's all essentially about systems and frameworks. So a website is a framework. A video is a framework. There's a beginning, a middle, and an end. A website has got a top, a middle, and a bottom. And the same with a presentation. And the power of where AI is going is, if you can put code into that framework, it's a structure, you can manipulate it in any way you want. So what I mean by that is, you can say to the one part of the framework, I need you to do this action. So bring in data from these sources into this framework. Or I need you to turn this framework, which is text, into a visual. And I think that's quite a powerful thing. So you often hear, if you look at guys that are out there, they talk about, these are my swipe files. that you can take from me. And swipe files, all that swipe files are templates. They're templates in ways that they do things. And I confess, I've never been a template guy. I think to my detriment in many regards. I think you've got to try and, especially as you become more time poor, you've got to try and function with some sort of template and structure that gets an outcome. Not that you're cheating, but I think the biggest shift moving forward is I think people are going to go, okay, this is the outcome someone wants. I can use this framework, but I can also pull data in from multiple sources into this framework to manipulate it however I want. So I think that's going to be big over the next while. If you look at, I saw something the other day which blew me away. It was a robot, artificial intelligence, that had seen someone fill in a form online about a new car to test drive it. The artificial intelligence then phoned the person and then used Google Maps based on where they were located to arrange a test drive for a vehicle in their area. And if you think about it, all that is a framework that's been worked there, So I think I think the mistake people are making is they're getting very hung up on things like Mid-Journey, being able to make cool graphics and stuff like that. And I think that is awesome. But you must remember, at the end of the day, you're trying to move somebody to make a decision. So you're trying to get a customer to buy your product or service. So that stuff is cool because it may save a bit of time, but you've got to look at things with a commercial lens and go, okay, so how is that going to help me get customers? Is it going to do that, or is it just a nice thing to have? And that's really where my headspace is to go, okay, how do I grow in my understanding of frameworks and structures where I can be a better creative and a better businessman? So, because I think data is going to populate that stuff more and more. And I think if you look at everything in life, it has a cause and it has an effect. There's input, output. So you've got to ask yourself, when you're making something, what can I control in the input, output? How can I change things here to manipulate this thing and make it better or make a better outcome? So I think if you look at stuff that everyone's doing, they seem to be playing in that space. But yeah.
That's great question, Marijke, and a fantastic answer as well, Garth. In the last few minutes we have, I think two things I was wondering about, but perhaps we'll just break it down to one. And you've kind of alluded to it now. My question is, what advice would you give to entrepreneurs and especially business owners looking to take advantage of the new technology? I mean, you've kind of spoken to some of that now, but how would you give them advice and potentially, from your perspective of we explain stuff and your specific niche and the offering that you have, what kind of thinking would you give to those entrepreneurs? How should they approach these next 10 years? With what kind of mindset do you reckon?
Sure. I think you've got to, the more complicated the world gets, the more simple you've got to make your thinking. And what I mean by that is, there was a really interesting meeting I had recently where someone had some new tech that they wanted to share with one of the banks. And the head of the bank that looked at it, he asked one question. He said, what is the demand for this thing? And I think you can get totally enamored with all the new stuff that's coming out. But I think what you've got to look at is, what problem am I solving? and how big is that problem? Is it a small problem? Is it like a niche problem, like a big problem? Is it a niche problem? That's the thing to ask. And guys like Seth Godin and that are really good at that stuff. Like Seth says, marketing essentially is about communicating to somebody about a problem you're solving with a product. So you want to see what your consumers' problems are, and then see how you can solve that problem. And then technology is an enabler in that space. That's all it is. It can obviously do it much better than humans, but I think you got to be careful that you don't get so hung up on all the new tech that you don't stay a problem solver. You've got to be first and foremost somebody that sees opportunity, and then has the ability to follow through on actually delivering the solution. So that's what I would say. I mean, I really stick to my sweet spot, which is being able to make complex things simple to drive sales. That's really what I do well. And there's obviously overlaps in that, like there's education and there's all of that, but that's my sweet spot. So I will look at technology through a lens of that and go, okay, this has come in. Can it make this easier for me? So I use ChatGPT quite a lot, to be honest with you. And I use it mainly as a sounding board and to refine some of my thinking. And a lot of times I don't agree with it. I'm like, nah, that's crap. I think it's okay. But
I'm sure you're not the only one.
Yeah.
Jokes aside, I think I'm quite a divergent thinker. So I can think I think about lots of different things. And I think a lot of creative people are like that. We really struggle to kind of dial in our thinking. ChatGPT is really powerful around the thing I shared earlier with frameworks and structures and seeing patterns and things like that. So I think it's incredibly complementary for creative people. It's a really, really powerful companion because our minds are often all over the show. So yeah, that's what I would say. I would say, look at the problem you're solving. Always ask that, and how big is it? And is there a demand for it? In other words, when people see it, do they go, ooh, I need that? Then you know you're on to something, and then use technology as an enabler in that space.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Garth. I think we've nailed it. We're on the hour. Thank you so much, Marijke, as well, for co-hosting with me and asking such fantastic questions. Garth, thank you so much, man. Your generosity of time and insights and things that have taken literally decades for you to figure out, sharing them here, it's absolute gold. So
Yeah,
I really do appreciate it.
Thank you.